Hey, welcome to Breakwood Carpentry. In this video, I'll show you how I install this pre-pasted LPP2 wall liner. You're supposed to lay this stuff out horizontally, so I'm just measuring down from the ceiling and drawing a level line. Then I'm measuring from the line to the ceiling to see if I have any weird high spots or anything in the ceiling that would have me adjust the line up or down. So the reason I'm using this product is because I'll be wallpapering the upper half of the wall and wainscoting the bottom, and this is supposed to smooth out the wall texture without me having to skim coat it or do any sort of crazy things. Now, this stuff needs to be fully submerged in water to activate the glue on the back. I ended up using my bathtub because I didn't have anything else and I wasn't really prepared. But if you have a large storage bin or even a kiddie pool, that would probably work a lot better. Especially if your room is not close to your bathtub, you're going to end up tracking this glue all throughout the house. So don't ask me how I know. And then I immediately took it to the wall and began placing it. This was the second sheet I laid, and I ended up butting the pieces too close together on this seam, which caused some problems later on when I primed it, and I'll point that out to you when we get there. Now, when it comes to hanging this stuff, I would advise keeping at least a 1/16 or even an 1/8 of an inch gap and just fill the seam later. I was going to fill the seams either way, but I didn't realize that getting them even closer than a 1/16 would cause issues, but it definitely did. So try and keep them at least 1/16 to an 1/8 apart. I just used a drywall knife and a super sharp snap blade to cut the edges. Emphasis on super sharp. A dull blade will have a really hard time cutting this stuff cleanly, especially when it gets wet. I just used the drywall knife to smooth it all out and get good contact with the wall. I didn't have any issues with the drywall knife as far as scraping or tearing. But if you're not comfortable using that, you could always use some sort of plastic knife, and that would have less danger in terms of trying to tear through this stuff. Now, you'll see here when I run the knife across it, a lot of the glue starts to squeeze out of the bottom. And when you're smoothing out the sheet, this stuff is just going to drip from the bottom. So I highly advise covering your floor with either paper, plastic, or a tarp. I used this rosin paper that painters use. But I probably should have used plastic because this stuff got so wet that it just saturated through to the other side. This last little piece was slightly skinnier than the others, and I went ahead and pre-cut it skinnier. You want to work with as little material as possible because this stuff gets glue everywhere, so you don't want to have a bunch of glue laying on your baseboard or your floor, especially if you have carpet or something like that. So definitely pre-cut everything to only be a few inches wider than it needs to be. Any longer and you'll end up having a big mess on your hands. Once everything was hung, I went ahead and wiped it all with a wet sponge. It was just damp. I wrung it out and just gave it a quick wipe down, nothing too serious. So this is what the wall looks like 2 days later. It's dry, it's smooth. What I'm going to be doing is filling the seams. I'm using this just this patch and repair compound. It's all self-contained. It works great. The only issue with this stuff is that it takes 24 hours to harden. So you might be better off using something like a Drydex or some sort of fast setting thing. Any sort of patch and compound will work. This is just what I have on hand, so that's what I'll be using. So after filling the seams, I let them dry for 24 hours and then went ahead and started sanding it with a 120 grit drywall sanding sponge. I only ended up doing one coat of the seam filling, but I probably could have used one more. If you really look closely, you can see where the seam is, and one more coat probably would have been perfect and made it really disappear. So just keep that in mind if you need it to be really smooth and really perfect. So I went ahead and primed it once everything was dry with a bin 123 latex primer. You can use any sort of primer. I don't think that it doesn't matter that much. It's just meant to seal it in place. It just helps it hold up over time and keep everything from falling off, I guess. I went ahead and filled all the seams before priming, but I've seen some people who would prime it first and then fill the seams. That way, when you are sanding the patching compound, you don't end up sanding through the paper. I didn't seem to have any issues when I was sanding without priming first, but just keep that in mind. If you're worried at all, you can prime first and then fill the seams, and that might work a little better for you. Especially when the seam starts to separate like mine did, it might actually be better to prime it and then fill the seams after everything's already expanded and separated. So just keep that in mind. So I just finished priming, and this is the final product. It came out really well. The only issue I ran across was up there at the top, the very two first pieces that I laid of the wall liner. I tried to butt the seams, but then when I went to paint them, they started to swell, and the seams when it swelled, they buckled together and caused bubbles to appear there. So what I'm going to be doing is, once the primer I put fully dries, I'll go over this again with drywall mud, and hopefully that will lower the bubbles and seal that seam again. I'm going to be going over top of that with wallpaper, so I'm not overly worried about it, but if this was on the lower portion of the wall, it would have been a real bummer, because I need this portion to be smooth because I'm going to be doing wainscoting on the bottom here. And it did come out really smooth and pretty good. I only put one coat of primer, and it pretty much hid the lines pretty well. If I was to paint this even more, they would probably just disappear completely. So just keep in mind, if this needs to be paint grade, definitely don't butt the seams. Leave about 1/16 of an inch to maybe 1/8 inch or more, whatever you're willing to fill with drywall mud. But just keep in mind, if you try butting them, once you go to prime this, they will expand and it will force the seams to buckle. So anyway, thanks for watching. Leave any questions or comments down below, and stay tuned for the next video where I'll be doing the trim and the wainscoting and eventually the wallpaper. Thanks.